speaking in public isn't one of my preferred things. But you're a wonderful group to address. I just hope that after all the nice things Carol said, you're not very disappointed by the end of the day here. But you know, it's a great day. We're off to a flying start with that meditation, with Marcy's music that was so beautiful. It's also All Saints' Day, you know, so we have the fact that we're surrounded. These feast days are just reminding us of a continual reality, but the reality is we're surrounded by this great host of people who have gone before us, have run the path, have done what we're hoping to do, and they're there, and they're surrounding us here, maybe even especially the contemplative saints. And then those of us here who are still working at it, right? And one of the images, I think, from Paul, that we are stones of the temple of God being chiseled still. So if you look around and see some wounds, we're just in process. Here we are, working that way. And there's one extra bonus come in from the universe, which is today is the last day of daylight saving time. So you get an extra hour to sleep tomorrow to kind of celebrate our being together and what's gone on today. So there's a lot of good things all collecting together. And I get this chance to speak to you and hopefully be a part of what's going on with you. What I plan to do, as you heard, images that accompany my prayer. I am being real clear with you. These are not images during your prayer, Centering prayer is imageless prayer, and if it comes, you have to let it go like a little cloud and get out of there. But these are images that can touch us anytime during the day. You know, we have a long day, and invite us into prayer. Images that can remind us of prayer. And if the images have been taken into the heart and connected with the real experience of our own, then those images can come back and bring us back to the whole thing that we experience. They have a wonderful trait like that. So I like to deal with images and stories. So partly because I like them, okay? And my own experiences, I have learned from images. They've been one of my main teachers. So that's a beginning of why I chose this. Nobody gave me this topic to talk about, right? It was my own choice to do it. This is what I like, sort of a thing. The second thing I like about images is we remember them. I can remember, if somebody uses an image, I can remember that, and then I can sometimes remember what else he said. But the image is what comes through. And it's interesting if you're in the position of being a person giving a homily. If you've talked without an image, you've talked on trust in God and some of these other things, basically you could give the same homily 3 weeks later, and people won't even know it was the same thing they heard 3 weeks ago. They said, "Oh, that was nice, Father." But you use an image from an old homily you used 10 years ago. And people, "Oh, I remember that." And they like the whole thing. You say, "Darn, I can't use that one again for 30 years. And there we are. But we remember images. They work into our mind. They do a nice thing for us. And the other piece that I find helpful is it's a little bit, and what I'll be doing with you, a little bit like a smorgasbord. You can take one here, you can take one from there. If you miss something, you fall asleep, you get distracted, you don't have to worry, I've missed the logic, I'm not going to be able to pick it up. There is no logic, okay? It's going to be a collection of images. Some of them you may find helpful. Perhaps even right now, perhaps later, it comes back to you. Some of them you won't. It's just the way it is. But all this is offering something so that you can allow the Spirit to work that into you, and at its proper time it'll do what the Spirit needs it to do, to bring you back to some part of this reality that we're talking about. So that's why we're here in the style that we're here. Now, even though this doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end, the first one is invitation. So I have two images, actually 3, around the topic of invitation into prayer. And the first is a mystical invitation, coming from the Bible, coming from the Hebrew Bible, the prophet Hosea in some translations. And there's a text there that you'll see at retreat houses, but it's just one of those prime gems in the scripture that keeps coming back. And I want to start with that. Yahweh is saying through the prophet Hosea, I will lead her into the desert, and there I will speak to her heart. Now he's, in the context, speaking of Israel as the her. But clearly, it's something God is saying to each one of us. I will lead her into the desert, and there I will speak to her heart. So where is the desert? For Hosea, it was probably a real close recollection to the physical desert. Jews had spent 40 years wandering in the desert. God would lead them back there. This afternoon I'll talk a little more about desert in that sense. But a desert can be a retreat house. It can be this chapel. It can be a place in your house that you keep apart for prayer. Or it can just be a place inside you. Or it can be your time of centering, is the desert that God leads us into. And then, when we're there, he says, I will speak to her heart. Now, isn't that a beautiful description of centering prayer? I will speak to her heart. So that's what God is up to. I will lead her into the desert. One translation, I will allure her and lead her into the desert, and there I will speak to her heart. Now, about 35 years ago, I was at a retreat in the Trappist Monastery of Gethsemane, Kentucky, and it was given by a Holy Cross Father, Father John Dunn of Notre Dame. And he said, you know, that phrase, if we just reverse the words desert and heart, we get a very interesting perspective that shifts slightly. So if we do that, what we get is, I will lead her to her heart, and there I will speak to her emptiness, her desert. And there's a beautiful meaning there. In our day and age, and I don't know what other ages were like really, but we had to shut off all of our technological equipment for communication here on Joanne's command. But the fact is, we are so wired that we're communicating, we're in touch, people can buzz us, text us, zip us, whatever else. We're caught in this whole sphere of continual communication. And also we have a tendency of intellectualizing, of, you might say, taking a very intellectualized approach to life. We have all the psychology, we have all the other stuff, so our brain has all these ideas, okay? God has to lead us to our hearts. We've gotten so far from our hearts in many ways because of all of the continual stimulation, electronic, technological, and I believe in all that is helpful. I'm not on any kind of a rant against it. All I'm saying is, to be really human and to become who God made us to be, we have to be able to get to our hearts and be able to live out of that space of our hearts. So to hear this text in such a way that God is saying, I will lead her to her heart. And there I will speak to her desert, her emptiness, her receptivity, her openness. You know, I believe it was Karl Rahner said something like, our hearts are a God-shaped capacity for God. And Augustine said it, O Lord, you have made our hearts for yourself, and they will not rest till they rest in you. So if we are drawn to this heart, that's what our centering prayer does to us. It brings us back to our center, to our being. Shuts down, as Joanne suggested, all of our little devices for a while, and lets us just be God in our heart. So that's what I would call the mystical invitation into our centering prayer, into our deeper union with God. Now, the second one I call our practical invitation. It comes at me from a very different angle. It's not the prophet telling me that God is saying, I will lead you into the desert and there I'll speak to your heart. It comes from looking at myself and some of my characteristics. And for this I want to use two stories. The first story is an interesting little snippet out of the gospel where Jesus is in the boat at sea with his disciples and there's a tremendous storm and Jesus is sleeping. Okay? You all know that story. Now, what I want to look at in it is the contrast between Jesus and his disciples. Okay? Now, for this I'm using some imagination because the gospel text only goes so far. But the disciples, take a look at them, and they're fishermen, by and large. You know, they ought to know what water is and storms are and bad weather and whatnot else. They are in a panic. They're running around the boat. And actually, they're pretty upset because Jesus is sleeping, you know. Here we are in this incredibly frightful situation. This is a big storm. This is not just something that'll get the tourists upset. I mean, the fishermen are upset. This is a big storm, and he's sleeping. God is sleeping, you know. Does anybody care? What's happening to us here? We're liable to go down, huh? They even say that when they finally break down and wake Jesus up. Hey, don't you even care that we're going down? And there's them. So that idea of just being caught up in the panic, running around, and you know, not knowing exactly what to do other than wake up Jesus, that's a little piece of the contrast. The contrast is, of course, Jesus, who is sleeping. Now, he's not sleeping because he's exhausted, he's been out all night fishing and he's just tired, or it's not a kind of a conked out zone. It's the sleep of someone who knows that he is totally in the hand of God. That all of his life is in the hand of God. That he can trust what's going on. He doesn't have to be sniffing the weather and doing the rest of it. He can just be there in that loving trust, okay? And he can rest. He doesn't have to be part of the panic. So that's the contrast at first. The panic of the disciples, and then that calmness, that centeredness, that inner poise, whatever you want to call it, of Christ, who knew his connection with God and that nothing ever separated him from that connection. Now, what I'd like to do is also reflect on what in my mind is very similar from the point of view of contrast. A story coming out of the Taoist tradition in China, a story that's told in 4 little pictures. And to my mind, saying something very complementary to what we're looking at in the gospel. In the first story, there is a farmer. Now, in this Taoist presentation, this fellow represents the wise man, the person who has wisdom, the person who is centered, the person who knows who he is and what this universe is about. He's the farmer. He has a neighbor who represents the person who's not enlightened, the person who's like me, running around, okay? In this first picture, the farmer who had only one horse, he wasn't a very wealthy farmer, his horse has run away. His neighbor comes running over. Oh, you poor fellow, you hardly had anything, just one horse, and now that horse is gone, you don't have a single horse. What on earth are you going to do? Gosh, you get all the bad breaks. And our farmer, the wise man, simply answers a very deep space from himself saying, who knows? Okay, this isn't a flippant, who knows? This is a deep understanding of the mystery of the universe. Who knows what's good and bad? Who knows what's whatever? Who knows? We just go with it, okay? Who knows? Well, in the second picture, the farmer's horse, who was a mare, comes back into the yard and there's 3 wild stallions following her. So all of a sudden, he's gone from 1 horse to none, and now he has 4, okay? Back comes the neighbor. Oh, you lucky guy. I can't believe it. Just when I thought everything was miserable and that you were going to go under as a farmer and all the rest, here you have 4 horses. Isn't that fantastic?